Welcome everyone, this new episode of Let's Talk AI. Super happy to be here with Susan Shu Chang. Susan, how are you doing?
Good, good. Yeah, happy to be here.
So, quick reminder, everyone who is listening, Let's Talk AI, we're talking data, we're talking AI. If you're a data professional and you want to take your career to the next level, if you want to have a 360 vision of the field and understand the latest technologies, have tips from expert people, this is what we do here. And today we're with Susan. So, Susan, maybe for the people who might not know you, can you share a brief introduction of yourself? It can be personal and professional.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Susan, and I work at Elastic. So we make Elasticsearch, which is pretty commonly used in tech stacks all around the world. I'm a principal data scientist there. Previously, I was a principal data scientist in a fintech company, and before that, I worked also in telecom, so quite a lot of industries. In my free time, I like to do game development, play video games, and I'm also writing a book on machine learning interviews. So also some things there too.
That's awesome. A book that will published is that will be published by O'Reilly. I
Yes.
have many questions to ask, not necessarily only about interview question, but I think it can be very interesting. Uh, I think I would like to ask you. You mentioned that you have different patients and you have a very impressive career. What are you trying to achieve today, either as a principal scientist, but also in general? Like, what is your vision?
I think it's fun for me to keep learning. So I think that's one interesting thing that attracts me to machine learning and data science, which is the field is growing very fast all the time. And I really think that it really satisfies my curiosity. For example, recently at work, I was working on generative AI, and that's new. And before, I was working on various new fields in machine learning. So that always makes me not feel a bit of boredom, I guess, if I was to do the same thing over and over again every
Right.
day.
Hmm. I can see. Um, I think what I would like to ask you about starting this episode, now that we know you a little bit better, would be make kind of a retrospective of like since you graduated and through your careers, like key moments, so that we can grasp the idea of what you've been doing and also what's your expertise. And I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to get tons of tips and practical tips for anyone who is listening to your career, and then follow up questions on my part.
Okay, sounds good. I think if we were to start from a bit more of the beginning, because I think one key moment is entering the field. And I actually had a background in economics. So, one key thing I think was learning how to interview for data science and how to respond to questions that are related to my education. So, for example, building projects at school that use Python and machine learning, so then I could use that in my interviews. I think that's like one key thing that I accomplished, which was self-learning Python because that wasn't part of school. So that's like the early thing. And then one early interesting thing was working on a recommender system when I was working in the telecommunications company. There were millions, like many millions of users. So I think that was like an early way of making impact, which actually in retrospect I'm very grateful for because there was a lot of good mentorship provided at the company. So I think that really helped me build up my career and take on that responsibility
Hmm.
early in my career rather than later, because I think it takes a lot of trust to do something like that earlier in my career. So I think those are some pretty proud moments I've had early on. I'm happy to go on, but it could be I
Please
could.
go on. Please go on.
Okay. I think one interesting thing I did in my previous company was because I had much more responsibility, even more responsibility there. I think that's the trend, which is I kept growing in responsibility because it was a smaller team in a startup, a fast growing startup at the time. Um, so I was it was very fast paced. Like
Hmm.
we want to make a change, then I could directly change it if we want to build something, we'll directly build it like very quickly. But in a bigger company, there's more people, need more approval,
Mm-hmm.
longer planning. But I actually feel that even though the team was smaller, I had so much responsibility there that that was really very good learning experience. I think we would say my coworkers and the people in the company would say that 1 year here is like 3 years somewhere else.
Hmm.
So I think being able to learn from such an environment and deliver things in such an environment was a really big milestone for me too in my career. Like being able to be in big companies and also like smaller companies, be in more slower environments and also fast environments. I think that really expanded my professional like capabilities and like my understanding of like applied machine learning in a very different way.
Hmm. Awesome. Awesome. And you're now working at Elasticsearch. We'll be able to discuss Gen AI recommendation systems and Elasticsearch, the company itself. Just quickly before that, regarding your education, you mentioned that you're self-taught Python, that you started Python on your own. You also mentioned that you really like uh, building video games on side projects. But my question is, how did you get into tech? Were your studies related, or then I think it could be very interesting also for you to discuss, and this could be a very good introduction to the book that you're writing. But how do you start interviewing for these kind of jobs? So first, to summarize, how did you get into like the technical aspects of things, Python, etc., and second, how did you get to apply, and what are the criteria for someone to apply in roles like data scientists and so on?
Yeah, for sure. I think the way I learned the fastest is learning by doing. So I made sure to, even though I started with basic tutorials, I always made sure to quickly, as soon as possible, apply them myself as well. So not just reading or like, reading and watching videos, but then watching like the fifth video and watching the 10th video doesn't make too much of a difference anymore. Or like taking the first Coursera course to taking the fifth Coursera course doesn't really like there is some benefit, but then after that there's no more benefit unless I made my own thing. So I think
Hmm.
that's what helped me really quickly build up a relevant portfolio. So I would say that the projects that I did were helpful to bridge that gap between okay, like this is someone maybe not from a statistics major or a CS major or a data science major these days. When I was at school, there was no data science major, but now there's a lot. Now there's a lot of them. So being from a less related major at the time, I do actually see economics being listed much more these days too on the required. So I would say that it's still a bit relevant, but one thing is just trying to get to hands-on, building a good portfolio that was able to get interviews, and
Hmm.
also I had good referrals because I went out of my way to talk to people. So my program had a academic advisor. I asked her, "Hey, do you know any alumni that work in data science? I'm interested to go into data science." She gave me two or three names. I DM'd them on LinkedIn. I was able to get on the phone with one or two of them. One of them never responded, but it's like that's how it goes, right? You have to I had to make the effort to do that. And I also had a good friend who was in the same program a few years before me, and then he also referred me. So I think going out of my way to talk to people, reach out, make use of those resources. I also mentioned that in the book too, how this has helped me and how people might not realize the extent of the resources that are available to help them.
Hmm. Awesome. Speaking about the book, maybe it's a good opportunity to discuss interviews. So this is one thing that you mentioned in the book, but for everyone who is listening, um, what are the intentions? Like, why did you start writing this book, and what do you intend to share with people by publishing it?
Yeah, so after so coming from, let's say, less of a traditional background and also working in the field for a while now, I noticed a few trends. I think one is that the interview process is still very mysterious and also difficult. Every company has such different machine learning interviews. I've interviewed with a company, they only asked me coding questions, Python questions, and they didn't ask any data questions. And I've been through interviews where they mostly ask kind of technical deep dive or kind of system design machine learning related questions. I've been through ones where they ask like half and half. You know, they all are very different, and I wanted a place to just put down somewhere everything, almost everything, not everything, because then the book would be too big. About all these hidden signals, hidden expectations about the interview process that I had to learn many, many years. So, for example, one example of hidden criteria is when doing coding interviews or doing, let's say it's a take home coding interview. Basically, it's expected that the candidate writes down some tests, right? Like Python, like you write some like unit tests or things like that.
Mhm.
I didn't know that until I had done a few interviews, and my friend had done that and wrote tests, and it was good. And also, when I was interviewing um, people, my manager was like, "Oh, like we have to look if they have tests." And I think there are such things that really help, but it's not mentioned anywhere. I don't see it anywhere. Online, it's mostly you can find the sample questions, you can find the question bank online, right? But it's like everything else. Behavioral interviews. I didn't know I had to prepare for that early on. I didn't know that different companies ask different things. I thought I was preparing well, and then I got asked something totally different. I didn't know how to talk to recruiters when I first started out. Just to summarize, there's over the years I've learned so many things. I wanted to put it all together in one book to help not only people who are first starting out and don't know, or the things I learned from mentors that I wouldn't have learned online, that are like the question banks I can look up myself. But everything else, there's just so much about like how what the interviewer is thinking, because now I've interviewed a lot of people too. I know what to expect. I know
Mhm.
why we're asking this question.
Right.
And yeah, one even more surprising to me is people who have been in the field for many years,
Hmm.
when they go back to interview, they're always surprised, like, oh, wow, I didn't know they asked this. So I wanted the book to also be a place for not only newcomers, but even when I had been in the field for 1 or 2 years, I didn't know all of this either. When I went back to interview for another job, I was like, wow, like they're asking this. So I wanted to include all of that as well.
Awesome. Now, now people will be looking out for this book. I'm sure that plenty of people will be waiting for it to be published. For example, when you do interviews at your current company, with all this expertise that you have and that you're building up into this book, can you share with us maybe some of the key aspects towards data science and machine learning that you're looking for into someone, and how maybe can people approach this framework of preparing themselves into interviewing
Yeah, for sure. I'll
interviews?
share some key points here. One thing candidates like sometimes overlook is really the communication aspect. So the interviewers, like we are, we are very well versed in ML, but we might not actually be well versed in the same field that the interviewer is coming from. So, for example, let's say someone is very skilled in computer vision and their projects are in computer vision.
Right.
They start interviewing and they just start talking about all these terms, and me and my fellow interviewers, maybe we come from fields like NLP or recommender systems, and we have to spend some time clarifying what they were talking about. So it wastes time and it makes the interviewers confused. Of course, like we'll ask, but then that also just spends some more time if the explanation is even more complex, right? So that has actually happened before, and I think that's what. So in summary, we're looking for someone who can clearly convey highly technical concepts. So one interview question I had in the past, both as an interviewee and the interviewer, was so let's like I'm talking about let's say collaborative filtering or whatever, like tree-based models in my interview. Then the interviewer, as an interviewer, I'll say, "Can you explain this like I'm 5 years old? Explain this to a 5 years old." And see how they respond to that. Because
Mm.
how if there's some candidates in response to this question, they still keep saying a bunch of acronyms and like a bunch of math and things like that. And then it's kind of hard because in my job, from beginning to now, all the time, I have to communicate with people that are not just machine learning experts. I have to communicate to software engineers, data engineers, product managers, directors, product directors, and things like that, right? I have to, for me and for the candidates we're looking for, we need people to ideally be able to do that or be trained to be able to do that. But if
Hmm.
they don't have the mindset to do that, then they won't do it. Um, so that's one thing we're looking for. They can work in a team and communicate.
Hmm.
Of course, the technical bar is always going to be there. All these candidates, if we're already filtering them on this kind of communication, that means they're good enough technically. So let's just assume that's out of the way. Because there's a lot of candidates who are they're technically sound, and I think um, there's a lot of candidates who are, of course, like they have built projects. Ideally, we're looking for someone who's built it, who's understanding the end-to-end
Hmm.
project. So they're not just training the model alone, like
Right.
by themselves. Like it's best if they know like how to communicate, or even better if they worked with someone else, like a data engineer. Even better if they work with also product managers. Like it's hard to say this for entry level, right? But like let's say they did some school projects and they work with other people. That's good enough if they can communicate like how they dealt with that situation. Um, so that's something we look for. Like, can they not only contribute technically, but can they actually get things done in a team? Because that's one important thing.
Mm.
So yeah, I know it's like less on the technical side, but I find that finding people who are technically they clear the bar is less. It's hard still. I mean, to be honest, there's lots of people who don't clear the bar, but out of people who clear the bar, we are still quite looking for people who have done like more end-to-end projects and can
Right.
communicate and work in a team.
Right. Makes sense. Thanks for sharing those points. While you are sharing, I feel like those are two very important things, and I feel like we don't hear them enough. And I feel like maybe we hear those examples, but I mean, it's like you said, like you watch the first course of Coursera or Udemy or whatever platform, and it won't make a difference if you watch the fifth or the seventh, because then you need to practice. And so, this is my statement. Please correct me if you see it differently, but I believe that going in interviews is like going to the gym, and that I can be great in my job and be very good technical, but not be prepared technically for interviews specifically, or like specific knowledge skills that I don't use on a daily basis as let's say data scientist, but I need to review all those concepts to be able to explain them clearly, even though I'm not using them on a daily basis. Uh, what do you say regarding that? Is that a correct statement? Would you add anything?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because one example for me is that like I don't do hypothesis testing that often in my day-to-day job, but every time I go through some interview loop, I have to review it again because they won't ask it all the time, but I think I've gotten a lot of questions about hypothesis testing. So I would say I have to review that, or I have to go back. Maybe there are some projects I did a while ago, and if someone suddenly asked me something on my resume, maybe I forgot some details. I need to go and look at my notes or look at my like past like my notes or my more detailed resume to remember and then prepare. So each time, like I think it's more, it's like I believe that this person is smart, they understand these things, but it's kind of like school, right? If
Right.
sometimes you do a midterm, you do final exams and you scored very high, and then 2 years later, maybe you forgot the content, right? You need to
Right.
definitely review it. So I definitely agree with that.
All right. All right. Um, so that's very interesting. I think I'll have more question for you on the interview aspect, but I would like to ask you about what you said at the beginning. Your passion for video games, as a gamer and as a game creator. So, if I'm not mistaken, you've also built a company around like building a video game. Uh, can you tell us more about this experience and how it impacted your life, your career, and everything that it might have impacted?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I would say that like because I started learning how to program was really because I wanted to make games. So it has indirectly or directly kicked off my entire career in software and in machine learning as well. So I think that's one lovely thing about it, which is just doing things without really expecting a return because I didn't know that this was going to be so amazing. And I
Hmm.
think I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's about like, following a curiosity and then diving deep into like, technical concepts that one is curious about.
Hmm.
Um, I guess like I built a game and then I started building a second game and then I realized that I could start delegating some more things because I think over after the second game I was feeling a bit more like each time I make a game I want to delegate a bit more because there are some parts that I wasn't really learning much more if I did the same thing again and again. So it's better to just hire someone to do it, and I can
Hmm.
work more on the like creative parts, the designing part, and of course, like I think the programming of the game is actually very creative also. But because I have done that so much, like I have done that for so long that
Hmm.
I was just like, I need to delegate this. And actually, that's helped me in my career getting promoted and things like that because part of the promotion to senior and beyond is actually like scaling up what they call like it's not just about my own code output but rather like other people's how I impact other people's code output. So there was a
Right.
book I read early in my career called The Effective Engineer
Hmm.
by I think Edmund Lau.
All right.
Yeah, I will kind of look that up. I'm pretty sure that's the name, but I mentioned this concept called like leverage for developers, and this all translates to machine learning as well, which is as a principal level or staff level a person like how do I make sure like someone junior on my team grows to be like a senior level or someone junior level, how do they grow, how does someone senior level also grow, how do I help them grow, because
Hmm.
this means like the any team that I am in will eventually 2x or 3x their maturity,
Hmm.
right? So this is what we call like developer leverage or mentorship, or whatever. And that requires delegation because I can't be everywhere at once. And
Right.
actually, I piloted that with the video game. Basically, I learned all of that already during the interview. Sorry, not the interview, the studio.
Hmm.
Um, this also ties in a little bit with what I really has helped me throughout my career, which is creating my experience almost, which
Right.
is like, okay, I want to grow to the next level. I just happen to do this with my game, my like side projects. I also like just learned this, like learn programming through the games. And then now I'm able to do this at work as well. It just happened to be like a pretty nice create my own experience type situation. But for other people, right? Like they have things like, I mean, you have to do podcasting, and some people have their other hobbies, right? People can definitely do that in their other hobbies as well. It doesn't have to be a programming related because I think video games is like a lot of it was programming, but a lot of it is actually more like managing because I don't do artwork, so I had to hire and manage like
Right.
artists, right? So
Hmm.
then it's like that is something I learned also that didn't impact my career that much when I was more junior because I mean no one's reporting to me or no one's like being mentored by me when I was junior,
Hmm.
but like actually like just a year or two later that became so beneficial, just without expecting that. So
Right.
people's experiences, some people lead meetups or volunteer at conferences, like
Hmm.
all that can help.
Oh, you mentioned volunteer conferences. All right, I have one first little question before I have many other, but this
Okay.
is a very fast one, and it is definitely related to video games. My question to you is: did you ever went into your video game codes to solve a problem at work?
Oh, actually, no.
No.
No, no. It's because the code used is pretty different. All the libraries and stuff are like
I
quite
would
different.
assume.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah,
I've
but
never developed video games, but I would assume I thought maybe like if you had trained a model for like how things acts, maybe this model, but maybe it's different. I don't know. You can well. That's a second question that I had also. You talk about software and data science, uh, and so how would you like how what are the main differences between a data scientist and a software engineer, and like do you feel that one combines another, and would you feel that you're also a software engineer as you've been developing games and so on? So can you share maybe some insights about that and about how the models are implemented in games if they are?
yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think in okay, I'm just trying to formulate this answer. So I think it's important for people going into machine learning to be good at machine learning, or like the things I'm doing requires a lot of like theoretical knowledge as well that I use like all the time, because if I don't know that, then if I just treat them like a black box, I don't understand how it works like underneath, then it's hard for me to troubleshoot anything, right? So it's kind of like
Mhm.
people who write code without understanding it. This analogy works for both machine learning and software, which is if you're just writing code you don't know about, when you're debugging it, it's hard to debug. It's easier to debug issues when you understand what's going on, really understand what's going on. And in machine learning, this is really important because sometimes if the model is very bad, debugging it is going to be very important, right? Because so for example, people building fraud models,
Mhm.
if it's just like such a bad model, they don't know how to debug it. Let's
Mhm.
say they suddenly start getting a lot of people who are able to successfully bypass, and that could lose their company, millions of dollars, right? So um, that means that if they don't understand how to debug these new issues when they come up, they're reacting all the time, right? Like there's always new things coming up. And when in my work in security and in Elastic, it's like there's always new ways that people can that we'll find that is like we need to use machine learning to detect this or that. They're always different. So if I don't
Mhm.
understand the underlying theory, I can't react to all these new situations. So I think, of course, like the machine learning, underlying principles are very important.
Mhm.
But why has I have grown more in like software maturity as I built the games and also did more stuff at work. I think for someone, just entering the field, they don't have to have both. But
Mhm.
I think it's important to eventually be more end to end. So then it's easier to I think for me, because I'm more end to end, I was more flexible with what I'm doing. So
Mhm.
then that meant that I could take on more responsibility. People
Mhm.
trust me with more responsibility because they know that I understand more pieces of the puzzle. Because I think there's that like pretty famous, there's like this diagram where it's like, I think like it's like a small box that's like machine learning algorithm, and then other pieces of like or like model deployment, like
Yeah.
data pipeline, like
Yeah.
yeah, development, deployment, and things like that. So it's kind of like the more you broader know about the entire system, and that includes software engineering or ML ops, ML operations, and model deployment. Not just like this model, like
Right.
yeah. So that's how I see it.
Right. Yeah, I always think that data scientists should grasp and try to dive into the data engineer skills or software engineer skills, because it is so fundamental. And if I don't have the ability to understand the data flow and how everything is moving, how can I make sure that what I'm building is meaningful, because I have no overview of data and I have no overview of lineage and so on. So yeah, makes sense. Also, correct me if I say something that you would add something or correct. But this is all right. Understood. Lesson checked. Following on the next question and something that you just mentioned, it's about public speaking, about speaking at events and so on. You've been doing that for some time. It have helped you a lot in your career. Can you maybe share on that specific skills that you've developed, and maybe share with people how to start or how to grow in those skills?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Ooh, I don't even know how I first. Oh, okay, I remember now. So, yeah, I'm just thinking. So, I would say public speaking has helped me a lot in my career. Also, with I started pretty early on.
Okay.
I was participating in like a journal club, so it's like a journal discussion, machine learning paper discussion. So it was like more like technical talks. It's a
Mhm.
group called the Aggregate Intellect, and I used to co-organize it. And we had in-person events, and now they've transitioned to online, kind of more like discussion based. I'm no longer, I guess, co-organizing it, but then I still am involved because a lot of those people are my friends, professional friends now. So I did that when I first started out, and it was more like technical talk, so
Mhm.
very like deep dive and things like that. Like I did a talk on it was like using reinforcement learning in recommender systems, written by someone working at Google, and how they implemented this to test out the YouTube recommender algorithm. So it was like diving deep into like the math behind that and things like that. So I think like once my coworkers saw I did that talk, I think they trusted me more or something like that. But I also at work, I there was we had those internal talks. I think like I forgot what they're called, but just like occasionally during like lunch hour, we would have like knowledge sharing, and like someone would like do an overview on some algorithm or what use case they found at some other company, or even the things we're working on, right? So I also participated in a lot of those talks.
Mhm.
So at the around the end of the time when I worked at that company, we also had some AI conferences like internally, and it
Mhm.
was pretty big budget on that. And like I think there's hundreds of attendees, and out of the people who were there speaking, I was I think the person with the least work experience tenure at the company, but I was able to speak at such a large internal venue
Mhm.
because of that. And I also practiced a lot. I actually asked. There was one talk early on. Like I did 10 dry runs. I did 10 dry runs, and I did it to people also. As in like I did the dry run not alone to myself, but I like shared a condensed version with other people, asked for their feedback on what I could add to it. And I asked my manager like how I could improve. So one feedback, one thing I learned is that people might not, depends on the culture, right? Like
Mhm.
sometimes like they might not give the more critical feedback initially.
Mhm.
So then I have to like ask them like again. For example, I think there was one talk where I was able to get a useful feedback, which is that like maybe is a very long talk. It's like an hour long. So then my energy level started to decrease at the end of the talk. So then once my colleague, my manager mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, that's so useful. But I had to proactively ask
Mhm.
about it so that I could
Mhm.
improve on it. So then I think that's one thing that helped. And actually, like I would say that right now I've I'm invited to do keynotes and things like that, and I can't even do all of them. There is like a keynote this year that I couldn't make it because
Hmm.
it's like abroad, and I think the costs were covered and all that, but it just didn't work for my schedule this year. But I didn't know that this was going to happen when I started speaking internally and when I started kind of speaking at more and more places. So I encourage people to just like it's useful too, right? Because when I work in machine learning, I have to one things that I built influence is be able to talk to product managers and
Hmm.
project managers in a way that they can understand. So then they would actually come to me if they're confused, and then when I had a suggestion, then they would like they would like already listen. More carefully. Like not always, but just like relatively it helped.
Right.
So I think that was like the small immediate benefit, but the long term benefit has been more than I expected completely. But
Hmm.
for people that I recommend how to get started is like through local small events, or like at your company there's some events or things like that. Just like free, just talk at one or two places for free, do some practice. There's many ways to volunteer and do smaller talks. I
Hmm.
started very small, right? Just internal audience,
Right.
um, or like local. I guess there's also big audiences too, but just like started with a smaller group and low stakes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then I think often people get more intimidated because it's like more they what they see is that like, oh, like Susan's doing like keynote, right? Hundreds of people listening. Um, but what is not seen is that like, oh, started with like some internal like five people, five people talk, not recorded or anything, just like make some slides and like go, right? So it's like all these like little things, like go from five people to like internal event to like a public 10 people event, and go on and on, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Right. It's like a constant journey of self-learning improvements. I had one question while you were explaining. For example, when you mentioned that you explained some concepts and the mathematics behind. Um, so we are in this field of data and AI submerged with technologies. There are people very good at using those technologies. And in the machine learning space, there are so much libraries that makes it so easy to just load the model, fit it, and go with it. So I think my first question to you would be, if I were to start practicing my skills of explaining what I do, how would you approach like the topic that I should talk about? I would assume that this is personal, but the topic that I should talk about in a way that I can also like deepen my skills and how I explain them, but also increase them and learn new thing because I want to explain this. So yeah, that's a big like. Do you have any tips or where would you start?
Ooh, I think maybe there's definitely a few angles for that, because I think one it's not always it has to be like more technical or more deep, and I think for people starting out it's totally fine to not understand like deep underneath like what's going on. There's libraries I use every day. I don't actually know what happens
Yeah.
underneath unless I spend the time to do it. But I think it's like
Right.
finding one or two things that you are really interested in, or
Mm-hmm.
like maybe your main project at work. It's good to use that as an opportunity to like
Mm-hmm.
learn more about it. And
Right.
for like the less important things, like you don't have to people don't have to spend time. I don't spend time on like learning all the so in depth about all the side things I do. But I think for the main project I'm responsible for, it's good to know more details.
Right.
Just like me personally, because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you can still get the things done without knowing it, but then it'll help with the next project or the next project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, just I think it's worth it to spend some time at some point to do some more technical stuff, technical understanding at some point. But it's not the starting point. It's not like, oh, first you understand everything and then you build the project. Not that doesn't always work out. Just like build and see if you have time. But I did make that a priority at the time. because I was like mostly like responsible for something. So I was like, I should really build up that skill. But it's not necessary. But yeah, as for the talk preparation, I think it's good to um, I think like it's good to come up with some interesting topics, but it's actually easier than what people think because I think what I was saying when I was trying to do talks like more externally, I think I initially was like, oh, I wonder if the things I'm talking about is interesting enough,
Mm-hmm.
or people's talks are so cool, like how are they doing that? But then I realized really quickly, like even if some of the things are repeated, so recommender system talks, I was seeing so many of them at the time. But like I would learn new things from each different industry, for example, like oh
Mm-hmm.
they did recommender systems in like let's say Netflix, or they did it in like a banking industry, or like they
Right.
did it in this other industry, and there's like new things that I didn't hear about. So like whatever you're doing in your industry might actually not it would be new to
Mm-hmm.
someone else.
Right.
Or I would listen to some NLP talks, and then it would be like, oh, the way they use NLP here, like, okay, the talk overlaps a little bit with this other talk, but it's like there's some new stuff to me because I don't work in NLP and I don't work in that field or any combination, or like I didn't use it at this scale, or I didn't use it with uh, like in like an internal tool, or I didn't use it like for external facing tool or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So it's like there's definitely something new, and I think people who are kind of like looking to speak can just like maybe like take a look at those. So for example, when I'm applying to a conference, submitting for a conference, I might look at the past year's like list of topics that they had,
Mm-hmm.
those talks
Mm-hmm.
they had in the last year, and see if there's anything that stands out to me.
Right. You look at conferences, you look at the subjects people are discussing. You might have your own sources of way to learn. Do you have anything to share, like as of how you learn? Did you read papers, for example, that sometimes new papers? Do you have some references or directions as of where people can look into to learn things?
Yeah, for sure. I highly recommend. I guess for some fields, like my friend Eugene Yan, he works at Amazon and he writes. It's like eugeneyan.com. He has very deep dives, and he has a curated paper list. So
Mm-hmm.
he has like, oh, this is like useful papers related to reinforcement learning, useful papers related to time series or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with those, or I recommend people to also start with those. Just whatever interests people. Like you don't have to check mark and go through everything because I didn't either. So just do what's interesting. It's more fun, and like it's more fun if it's in a topic that's more interesting. I would say start with that. I also sometimes look. So for example, learning about like generative AI, I do have my friend Suhas who writes. He's actually writing an O'Reilly book,
Mm-hmm.
and he's mentioned some new things. But I think even if you don't personally know someone who's like an expert, I do see a lot of these new related things on LinkedIn. So then if it's interesting, I'll look at it. Or for example, like when I was still first learning, I think that was when um, Google DeepMind. I think now they're called something else, like Google Brain or Google AI.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot, but we can add that. But they would release stuff like, oh, reinforcement learning to play like Go, or like even before that it was like chess,
Mm-hmm.
or like these new things, and then they would attach like the paper that's associated with that. So they would have like a blog post that's more like simple to understand, and I would read
Mm-hmm.
that, and then I would like read like the detailed paper to see what I can understand. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing because it was a topic I was interested to. It's kind of like machine learning and related to like games, right? Like not necessarily like video games because they actually did have a StarCraft bot. I think it was called Alpha Star. Yeah, and so like that was I also read that paper because it was interesting, but like even
Mm-hmm.
before that they had like other types of things, so it's like the
Mm.
topic that I'm interested in.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I feel like this is super important. Like following curiosity, this is something that will give the consistency of doing this, because then it might be harder. So I have, before we reach to the end of this episode, and thanks again for sharing everything. I want to talk a bit about Elasticsearch. So, what is your experience with Elasticsearch, and maybe can you share a project that really inspired you? I think that could be very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So at Elastic, I would say that it started as an open source project, and now like some of the things have changed a little. But the thing is, Elasticsearch is a very commonly used, I'd say, tool in many different tech stacks. And we also, I guess, the way it makes money is kind of like Red Hat and like some Linux distributions. Is that okay? There's like free versions of
Hmm.
most things, free functionality for a lot of things, but then there's also these like paid support. So, for example, consulting that enterprises can pay for, and they can get support, customized support or consultants or things like that. That's not what I do, but just like that's what they can get. They can get support
Hmm.
if they pay. I'm not customer facing, but I just mentioned that to mention like the various products that we build on top of Elasticsearch. So one
Hmm.
use case is that like so customers, enterprise customers, they might be managing logs for many servers, hundreds of thousands of servers. They also hundreds of thousands of like machines, like laptops, things like that. They need all that data stored in one place and easily searchable. That's what Elasticsearch does, which is like just dump all the data in. You can do like text search or like fuzzy search, freeform search. But actually, since a few years ago, forgot exactly what year, we also introduced I guess, machine learning capabilities. So then that there's like vector search. We can use Elasticsearch also for vector search, which is like pretty big for NLP or like generative AI applications.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess just to sum up, Elasticsearch by itself is very versatile. You know, people can use it to,
Right.
they just wanted to build a search bar in their app, for
Hmm.
example, right? So customers like big banks or I think like Instacart or DoorDash, Uber,
Right.
they even Netflix, and they use Elasticsearch in some capability. It might not be in their search bar like literally, but they could
Hmm.
use it for logging. They could use it for security or things like that. Um, so okay, where was I going with this? So I think that's the fun thing. It's very versatile, and then now that there's more generative AI or NLP capabilities, because like one thing the traditional Elasticsearch is good at is called keyword search, which is like, okay, you're searching something. So like if you're finding something related to Python, you're finding something related to Java,
Hmm.
it'll show up the relevant results, right?
Right.
It's not necessarily like in a Google sense, but like if you had a database or a data store with a bunch of
Hmm.
documents, you had a lot of logs. You want to find the logs of something that's running a Python process, right? So that's called
Right.
keyword search, which is like, okay, you're searching for something, it'll match the words. It can have like, it can adjust for typos or things like that. We use like
Hmm.
some algorithms under the hood for distance measuring and kind of like proximity, things like that to pull relevant results up. But with generative AI, we can also type semantic search, which is like just like
Hmm.
asking it based on the meaning. So it's like instead of, because the way you Google or like just using Google as an example, but you can use this in any search bar, right? Which is like in Google, like sometimes we'll type in a more like keyword search way, which is like
Hmm.
instead of like how do I import pandas? Okay, let's just use that very example, right? So I mean that can match something too, but how would I realistically do it? I would
Right.
say import pandas, right? Like I would take out the what's those words? Like I would take out like any extra words
Hmm.
or okay, so instead of saying what is the weather in Toronto today, that's natural language,
Hmm.
semantic search, like meaning. I would just
Yes.
type weather Toronto, right?
Yes.
That's key. That's more like a keyword search
Hmm.
way of like finding things. Or like for the pandas example, I might be like, let's say there's an error, right? I would just be like pandas, paste the error. or like something like that. I wouldn't be like, I encountered this error, like what do I do, right? But
Right.
then in one project I was working on recently was just like put like basically like natural, just like let's say there's logs, right, in
Mm-hmm.
Elasticsearch, in Elasticsearch data store.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have this thing called elser that can create embeddings off of that text. So then it would you could use some semantic search on it. So instead of saying just like Python or Java, I could search like what is related to object oriented programs,
Mm-hmm.
or sorry, programming languages, right? And because object oriented programming languages, on the meaning perspective, it is
Mm-hmm.
related to Python or Java. So you can find that with semantic search, but you can't find that with keyword search because it doesn't match the actual word, or it's not
Right.
like close in terms of like keyword search
Right.
specifically. Like that's a very generalized or broad example. Like there's more applications of that, but that's
Mm-hmm.
one recent thing that I found, which is like, oh, that's an interesting use of like Elasticsearch and like the Gen AI capabilities. And of course, like this can all be, we were using actually like GPT-4 for this, so it's not like, oh, it's all within Elasticsearch, but Elasticsearch was just one of the tools that can connect with,
Right.
the entire pipeline and life cycle of these things.
Right. Right, amazing, amazing. I think I would like to add that Gen AI on top of that, and on top of this amazing technology. Uh, I'm not biased. I'm not biased, but Elasticsearch is something that it is taught, for example, in my master when I was doing my master degree. Um, uh, we studied Elasticsearch and its functionalities and so on, and generative AI on top of that, plus vectorized database, which allow semantic search and so on. This is so powerful. As of with Gen AI, we can summarize, we can get, for example, keywords, we can derive one type of content into many other type of content, and we can all embed them basically, and just collinearity. I mean, this is one way, like the collinearity coefficient, and just like search them in between them.
Mm,
We can just count the, like, one example that I have for it's like asking of on a piece of content. For example, if I publish something on LinkedIn, asking on a piece of content, what is my audience, or what are the people reading this asking themselves, and like Gen
mm,
AI gives you 10 questions that you use your own decision to know what makes sense. But like this, in terms of opportunities and possibilities, I believe are very big, and I really look forward to see amazing things. And I mean, I would love to ask more about recommendation system and so on, because this is very fun, very interesting, and it have very big impacts in terms of the value it can add to users, and to the world. Do you want to add anything specifically to that, or should I switch to the two last question of the episode?
I think just like in terms of the tooling, like of course I work at Elastic, so I have used their tools, but I have also tried other vector databases also.
Hmm.
So, I think for people listening to this, definitely try things out, learn, follow your curiosity and all that, but definitely consider using Elasticsearch also. Because I mean, I myself use it and I did enjoy using it. Like I'm not like making that up, but I myself as a machine learning practitioner, I'm more like I actually tried other ones before I even used our own as a vector store. So just that.
Right, and this is a fun project that we're going to do on the show. On the web page, we're going to build a recommendation system to like find specific moments using a vectorized database. This is just a quick note. So last two questions, and before we are doing these last two questions, thanks for those who are still listening and still with us. This means that you're very curious and into serious about what you're doing about data and AI, and that means a lot. So Susan, I want to thank you a lot also for sharing on the show, taking this time. This is amazing. I know you have a very big agenda, so thanks a lot for being here and sharing your expertise. Last two questions. Would you have So first of all, where people can reach out or learn more about you, if you do any conferences, do you have a website? Like where can people see more of you?
Yep. So I write currently about machine learning interviews on susanshu.substack.com. So that's my Substack. I also have a website with some more general career things, and it also has all my conference appearances at susanshu.com. So
Hmm.
susanshu.com. And people can also find me on LinkedIn at Susan Shu Chang, and feel free to add me there. If you found me from this podcast, let me know. Yeah.
Awesome. Please let's send some love on all the social networks. And last question: would you have a last message for the Let's Talk AI community? This can be a personal message, a professional message, or anything you want.
Yeah, thanks for listening. To all the listeners, it means you're curious, you're interested in field, and that's really exciting.
Awesome. And I wish you to have an amazing day.
Thank you, thank you.